The sun rose like a rusted coin over the dry bones of Dry Willow, a frontier town no bigger than a minute. Dust drifted through its single main street, stirring only when the wind remembered it was alive. On the edge of town, beneath a sagging cottonwood tree, stood a woman in a dress the color of weathered parchment. Her name was Cora May, and it was her wedding day again. She stood alone, as she had every spring for the last 10 years, dressed in the same gown she'd sewn with her own 2 hands. The fabric, once ivory, now bore the hue of long-forgotten letters. She had no lace, no pearls, only needlework done by moonlight and prayers stitched into every seam. Townsfolk watched from behind curtained windows or rocked gently on their porches, offering no words, just the same sideways glances as every year before. "Still playing bride to a ghost," murmured old Merle outside the saloon, flicking his toothpick. "She never had a groom, is what I say," replied his drinking partner. "A story she told herself too long. Now she can't let it go." But those who knew the truth, those few still around, remembered Jedediah Klein, a cavalry scout with a crooked grin and a silver spade pin on his collar. He had eyes soft as creek water and a voice that folded even the wildest colts. He rode into Dry Willow 5 summers before the war took him, chasing thieves and rumors through Apache country. He left the town with something more than just law. He left it with a promise. Cora was barely 20 when he asked for her hand. He'd given her a bone-handled knife for protection and a silver coin to sew into the hem of her dress. She used the coin to weigh the veil down, so it wouldn't fly away in the canyon wind. He kissed her once beneath the cottonwood and said, "Soon as I return, you wear that dress." No preacher could stop me then. Then he left, and never came back. The army declared his unit lost somewhere near Devil's Pass. Some blamed Comanches, others deserters, but Cora never believed any of it. Jed had too much promise in him, too much unfinished in his eyes. She waited through that first winter, then the next, wore the dress again on the day they were to be wed. When spring came around and no one came riding up the trail, she wore it again. Now, 10 years later, it was part of the town's lore. Children dared each other to run past her ranch at dusk. Teen girls whispered about curses sewn into bridal seams. She became a legend without ever meaning to be one. Part ghost, part fool, part mystery. Yet she lived, day by day, in a small cabin on the outskirts of town, with a patch of garden that survived where most didn't. Her hands stayed busy, mending fence lines, stitching shirts for widows, tending the grave of a dog that outlived its master. She spoke little, laughed less, but every year, when the lilacs bloomed and the creek broke its winter silence, she stepped into that dress and stood beneath the tree. No one ever asked why. Not anymore. One April morning, after another failed crop of corn and another birthday with no letter, Cora sat at her table, restitching the hem that had frayed from last year's wind. She worked without thinking, her fingers moving from memory. The cabin creaked with the sound of age, and outside, the wind stirred again, kicking up a swirl of red dirt along the ridge. She looked up, eyes narrowing, and whispered the question she asked herself each year. "Do I stop now?" Her hand hovered above the fabric, needle glinting in the light like a little shard of truth. She thought about the town and its whispers, about how time stretched differently when you were the only one believing in something. But belief had built her. It had gotten her through a decade of loneliness, through 100 quiet nights when even the coyotes didn't call. She set the needle down and stood. The dress hung on the wall like a ghost waiting to be remembered. She stepped into it carefully, as though putting on armor. Each button fastened brought back pieces of a life she had nearly forgotten. The smell of sagebrush, the sound of Jed's laugh, the way he used to rest his hand on the small of her back like it belonged there. She brushed the fabric once, smoothed the shoulders, and stepped out into the morning. As she walked into town, the usual glances followed. Someone muttered. A child pointed and was quickly hushed. But she kept walking, chin high, spine straight, until she reached the tree. She stood there, beneath its still budding branches, hands folded like a lady at chapel. She waited, just as she always had. Only this time, something felt different. Not in the wind, not in the sky, but in the quiet that followed, as though the town had run out of mockery and finally started to wonder. No one spoke. Even old Merle just stared at the horizon, silent for once. And there, between silence and sunlight, Cora May stood like a promise kept too long. She didn't know what would happen tomorrow. But today, she wore the dress not because she was waiting, but because it still mattered to her. And that was enough. For now. The sound of hooves came slow and steady, like a drumbeat echoing through the canyon's edge. It was late morning, the heat just beginning to rise off the earth in faint, dancing waves. Most days, Dry Willow saw no strangers. Even fewer rode in alone, especially with war-weathered saddlebags and a rifle slung loose at their side. He was a lean man, sunburnt and shadow-eyed, with a coat too heavy for the season and a limp he didn't bother to hide. His horse was a tired-looking paint, its flanks flecked with dried sweat and trail dust. They moved together like they'd seen too many miles, and too few safe places. He passed under the crooked wooden arch of Dry Willow's entrance and dismounted without ceremony, boots scraping dry gravel. The town didn't stop, but it slowed. Storefront windows filled with curious glances. A child ran off to tell someone's pa. At the livery, the stable boy froze mid-brush. The stranger stood for a moment, looking down the road, as if measuring something only he could see. Then he walked with that uneven stride straight to the saloon porch, past the spittoon, past old Merle, who muttered something inaudible. "You lost?" asked the barkeep from inside. The man didn't answer. He turned instead and looked across the town square, where the cottonwood tree still held Cora May beneath its branches. The wind caught the edge of her skirt. She hadn't moved since sunrise. He started walking. Cora saw him long before he reached her. There was something about the way he carried himself, less a rider and more a survivor. He walked like a man coming to deliver something, not ask for anything. She didn't flinch, even when he removed his hat, revealing a pale scar across his scalp, like a lightning bolt laid down by a surgeon's hand. "Miss Cora May?" he asked, voice rough as a wagon's wheel. She gave a small nod, nothing more. He reached inside his coat and pulled out an envelope, yellowed, bent at the corners, sealed with wax that had long since cracked. He held it as one might hold a bone, delicately, reverently. "This was meant for you," he said, "from Jedediah Klein." Her heart stilled. No one had spoken his name in years. Not like that. Not like they knew the weight of it. She took the envelope in trembling hands and turned it over. The script was unmistakable. Her name, in Jed's careful handwriting, the loops and slopes of it stirring something long buried. She opened it slowly, the paper fragile, the scent of old dust and dried lavender rising with it. The letter was short. "My Cora, I don't know if this will find you, but if it does, know that I'm not dead. Not yet. Things went wrong. Some of the men we rode with, they weren't who they said. They sold us out to outlaws, working the border trails. I'm hurt, and they've scattered us, but I'm going to keep fighting. If this letter reaches you, it means someone did right by me. If not, just know I loved you until my last breath. Don't stop living, Cora. Don't stop fighting. Wear the dress. It matters. Always. Jed." The letter shook in her fingers. It was real. It was his. She looked up slowly. The man before her didn't look like hope. He looked like consequence. "Where did you get this?" "I rode with him," the stranger said. "Not at first. I joined up later, just before the ambush. I found him in a canyon near Devil's Pass. He was dying, but not broken. He gave me that letter, made me swear to carry it. I failed him. I couldn't do it then. I didn't have the courage." She studied him. His jaw clenched once, hard. His fingers twitched at his side. A man struggling with memory. "And now," she asked, "now I've got nothing left but the promise." He told her how Jed's killers had formed a gang, whiskey runners and raiders, carving out territory between Arizona and New Mexico. Said he'd tracked them for years, a name at a time. He wasn't hunting for law or money. He was hunting for peace. "There's only 4 left," he said. "The worst of them hole up in Widow's Hollow. They think they've been forgotten." "Then they're fools," she said, her voice low. He looked at her, and something shifted in his eyes. "I'm not asking for forgiveness, Miss Cora. I just want to finish what he started. He saved my life once. That letter, it's all I've carried since." She turned, walked back toward her cabin without a word. The man stood still, unsure if he'd been dismissed. Then the door creaked open, and she called over her shoulder, "If you're coming, come now." Inside, the air smelled of herbs and old cedar. The dress hung carefully beside the hearth. On a wall near the stove, a long oilcloth bundle rested beneath a shelf of canned peaches. She pulled it down and unwrapped it. A Spencer carbine. Clean. Oiled. Sighted. The man raised an eyebrow. "I wasn't just waiting," she said, not looking at him. "I was preparing." She took down a saddlebag, packed it with cartridges, jerky, a small tin of coffee. The dress she laid gently across the table. "I made it for joy," she said quietly, "but I'll wear it for justice." The man said nothing. What could he say? He'd brought her a grave and found a gunslinger. That night, they made camp near the dry creek, just beyond where the town's edge vanished into the wild. She told him little, but her silence wasn't cold. It was careful, deliberate. She was measuring him. "What do I call you?" she asked as the fire crackled low. He poked at the coals with a stick. "Folks used to call me Finch." "That your name?" "It's the name I earned." She nodded. "Then Finch it is." A long pause passed between them. "You don't have to do this," he said finally. "I can finish it alone." Cora looked up from where she sat, legs crossed, her rifle across her knees. "You think I wore that dress 10 years for nothing," she said. "You think I let them laugh because I was broken." She leaned forward, voice steady. "I wore it because I knew he wouldn't rest easy. And now I know neither will I." Finch looked into the fire, and for a moment he saw something he hadn't known he missed. A kind of resolve that didn't waver, didn't shudder. Cora wasn't just a woman wronged. She was a woman remade by grief into something iron. In the distance, coyotes howled. The moon rose like a pale coin in the sky. The two of them, rider and widow, sat in its glow, not as strangers anymore, but as the beginnings of a reckoning. Tomorrow, they would ride for Widow's Hollow, and the dress would ride with them. They left before dawn, when the air still carried the cool hush of night, and the sky had only begun to pale along the rim of the world. Cora rode a sturdy gray mare named Hazel, silent and sure-footed. Finch rode his same old paint, the one with the tired legs, but the heart of a fighter. They didn't speak much on the trail, but each hour brought a quiet understanding, like the desert itself had begun to whisper that something old was coming undone. The route to Widow's Hollow was long, winding through dry gulches and over scrub-covered ridges. Cora remembered the stories. The place earned its name when 5 women, each with a husband who'd gone west to chase silver, learned, in the same week, they'd become widows. Some say they screamed so loud that the canyon echoed for years. Some say their ghosts still did. The outlaws who'd taken up shelter there hadn't done so by accident. It was a hard place to find and a harder place to leave. One road in, no road out. The walls closed tight around the hollow like a clenched fist. Cora felt the land change as they approached. Less birdsong, more silence. Even the wind seemed reluctant to pass through. By midday, they crested a narrow ridge and looked down into it. The hollow lay below, a crooked line of shacks and lean-tos strung along a bone-dry streambed. Smoke rose from one chimney. Horses dozed in a corral. 4 men sat playing cards on a porch. No guards, no sentries, just the swagger of men who'd never been challenged. "Braxton's the one with the scar over his lip," Finch said, pointing. "Used to run payroll heists near Fort Bowie. The tall one is Calder. He's quick. Don't let the slump fool you. The other 2, I don't know." "You sure about this?" Cora asked, not looking at him. "I've never been more sure of anything," Finch said. She dismounted and pulled the dress from her saddlebag. Carefully, methodically, she slipped into it, white cotton, hand-stitched, now weathered by time and travel. It didn't gleam anymore, but it still shone. "You really mean to wear that?" Finch asked. "I want them to know who I am before I send them to hell." She strapped her revolver beneath the folds, checked the Spencer rifle once more, and drew a breath that was part prayer, part promise. Then she mounted Hazel again and gave the signal with a nod. They rode in plain, slow, side by side, as though they were part of the wind itself. One woman in white, one man with a scar, two ghosts riding into a place that fed on them. The outlaws noticed just before they reached the bottom of the trail. One stood, squinting, a toothpick falling from his lips. "Well, I'll be damned," said Braxton, rising to his feet. "Is that a bride or a funeral?" Cora said nothing. She rode straight toward them until she was near enough to see their stubble, the mud on their boots, the confusion in their eyes. "Where's Calder?" she asked. Braxton grinned. "And who's the skin, sweetheart?" "My name is Cora May Klein," she said, lifting her chin. "And I buried a letter from a man you left to die." That name, Klein, hit them like a thrown stone. Calder stepped out from the shade, and his grin faltered when he saw her face. He remembered. "Well, hell," he muttered. "This can't be real." But it was. Cora pulled the Spencer from her saddle, rested it across the horn. "You men took something that didn't belong to you. You took Jedediah Klein's blood, and you spilled it for coin. Now I've come to collect what's due." Braxton laughed, too loud, too sharp. "This is a joke," he said. "She ride all the way out here to scold us in a wedding gown." Finch dropped from his horse like a stone, rifle already raised. "She rode out here with justice," he said, and fired. The shot caught Braxton in the shoulder, spinning him backward into the porch post. Chaos broke loose, yells, scraping chairs, the crack of gunfire. Cora swung off Hazel's saddle and rolled to cover behind the trough. Calder fired wild, a bullet nicking the dress's hem. She didn't blink. The rifle came up smooth against her shoulder, and she fired once, then twice. One outlaw dropped near the well. Another ran but didn't get far. Calder bolted behind the shed, yelling curses. Braxton crawled bleeding toward the cabin door. Finch was a shadow on the move, working angles, drawing fire. He moved with purpose, like each bullet he fired was another nail in the coffin of his own guilt. Cora advanced slow, her dress catching on thorn and timber, blood on the edge now not hers. When she reached the porch, she stepped over the first man, without a glance. Inside the cabin, Braxton had pulled a pistol with shaking hands. He turned it on her the second she entered. "You think this'll bring him back?" he hissed. "No," she said, and shot him once in the chest. Silence fell in Widow's hollow like a curtain dropping. Outside, Finch stood with smoke rising from his barrel, chest heaving. Calder was gone. One had escaped. Cora stepped outside, blood on her dress, hair in her eyes. She looked down the canyon road. "You see which way he ran?" Finch nodded toward the east slope. "I'll find him," he said. "He's yours to finish." She looked back at the dead men, the hollow, the place where so many had come to vanish. "No," she said. "Let him run. Let him carry the story." Finch's brow furrowed. "You sure?" She nodded. "Men like that, they need to sleep with fear. If he vanishes, so does the warning. But if he lives, he'll speak her name every time he drinks. Every time someone asks what happened in Widow's Hollow." They burned the place before dusk. Let the smoke rise into the sky like a funeral pyre. Cora stood in the flames' glow, the dress darkened by dust and soot and blood, and knew this was the end of one story and the beginning of another. As they rode out, Finch turned to her. "You ever think about where you'll go next?" Cora looked ahead. "I think I'll go where they need reminding," she said. He nodded. "Then I'll ride with you a little while longer." She didn't stop him. Together, they rode into the falling sun. And behind them, Widow's Hollow burned, its ashes scattered by the wind, carrying the tale of a woman in white who'd come with no mercy and left with none needed. The sun rose over Dryfield like it had every day for 50 years, but that morning it cast its light on a street that felt different, too quiet, too still, like the town itself was holding its breath. Folk stood in doorways, hands shading their eyes, not speaking, not moving, just watching the figure come down the road. Cora rode alone, dressed in a worn, dust-covered wedding gown that fluttered faintly in the breeze. The hem was torn, a single streak of dried blood cut down one side. She carried no banner, no badge, only the rifle strapped across her back and the silence of a woman who had nothing left to prove. Behind her, the desert stretched wide and empty. Ahead, Dryfield lay hushed like a church after the sermon. Children stared wide-eyed. Mothers clutched their shawls tighter. The blacksmith stepped out of his shop, his hammer still in hand. Even Sheriff Greeley, who hadn't left his office since the train robbery 6 months ago, came to the edge of the boardwalk with a look that didn't quite reach his lips. No one knew what to say. Everyone remembered the dress. It was the same one she wore when Jedediah Klein married her under the cottonwoods by Miller's Creek. The same dress folks whispered about after he vanished on that last cattle drive, when his body never came back and neither did the pay he was meant to deliver. For years, they'd laughed, not cruelly, perhaps, but nervously, the way folks laugh when they don't know how to handle sorrow dressed in lace. Now they weren't laughing. Cora stopped in front of the general store. She dismounted slow, boots hitting the ground like final words. The town still didn't speak. She tied Hazel's reins to the hitching post, then walked across the street toward the saloon. Every step sounded louder than it should. Every eye followed her. She opened the door. The saloon went silent. Cards were laid down, drinks set aside. The piano player removed his fingers from the keys, as though they turned cold. At a corner table, Judge Morton sat with 3 ranchers and 1 banker, playing his usual morning hand. "Ma'am," the judge said slowly, standing, "we heard about what happened in Widow's Hollow." "I figured," she said, voice steady. "They say the Braxton gang's finished. That true?" "I didn't come here for rumors," she said. "I came to speak." Morton nodded once, gesturing for her to take the floor. Cora stepped into the center of the saloon, letting her gaze move over the men and women who once pitied her. Some had even jeered. She remembered the laughter behind lace curtains, the soft giggles during Sunday service. She didn't see scorn in their faces now, only quiet, wide-eyed reverence. "I sewed this dress with my own hands," she began, voice clear. "Threaded it by candlelight, stitched every seam thinking of the life I'd build with a man who rode with honor. When he disappeared, they said maybe he ran. Maybe he took the money and left me." She paused, letting that hang. But he didn't. He was shot in the back by men who knew he wouldn't give up the payroll, even if it cost him his life. And they left him there in the canyon dirt. No one moved. A glass trembled in someone's hand. "I didn't come back here for pity," she said. "I came to tell you something. This town has 2 choices. You can stand behind what's right, or you can keep quiet and pray trouble don't notice you." She turned slightly, meeting Greeley's eyes. "When was the last time you rode out after a man with blood on his hands?" she asked. The sheriff shifted uncomfortably. "You think I haven't wanted to. I think you got used to watching women bury their own dead." The silence thickened. Cora stepped back toward the door, every step loud in the hush. "I burned the Braxton gang's camp to the ground. 1 man escaped. He's running scared, spreading word of a woman in white who comes for justice. That story belongs to Dryfield now. So ask yourself, what kind of town do you want strangers hearing about?" She opened the door and paused. "Because I'm not done." Then she walked out. Behind her, the saloon didn't return to noise. The piano stayed silent. Glasses went untouched. For the first time in memory, the whole of Dryfield stood still, not from fear, but from the weight of a reckoning. Cora untied Hazel, mounted smooth, and rode on north, where rumors said another gang had taken over the trading post at Red Mesa. She didn't look back. But the town would remember, and they would tell it like this: that once, a woman rode in wearing the same dress they mocked her for, carrying the truth of her husband's last letter in her hands, and she left behind a silence that felt like a prayer. And from that day forward, no one laughed at wedding dresses. Not in Dryfield. Not ever again.